FBI informant Imad Salem met us at Ground Zero and talked to us for the first time about why he risked his life to help the U.S. stop Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman and his followers from bombing New York.
The original plan that we should blow the bomb on December, which Christmas Day, to spoil the American Christmas.
It was 1992 and Salem warned the FBI, but after he told agents he would never testify in open court and polygraphs on him were inconclusive, Salem and the FBI parted ways. But members of the terror cell again reached out to Salem, and again he went to authorities about how the terrorists were speaking in code. The Sheikh was furious that his right-hand man was actually an FBI informant, and Salem says the Sheikh later threatened him in the courtroom.
He said, "You're Satan," and of course everybody knows what they should do for the Satan. Working undercover is not an easy task, especially with people who have no mercy. The guy is bad news anywhere he is. As long as he is alive, people get killed.
FBI informant Imad Salem came out of hiding to warn about Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman and how leaders like the President of Egypt continue to press for the Sheikh's freedom, while leaders from the Persian Gulf nation of Qatar have requested the Sheikh be transferred out of the U.S.
When we gonna wake up and smell the coffee? This man is dangerous in prison. What will happen when he's out of prison? If we today release him, or like the State Department say, transfer him, is he gonna be grateful to us? Absolutely not. He will kill Americans. He will kill anybody who will dispute what he say with a fatwa.
I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm following Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman very closely. And sadly, for the first time since 20 years ago, he was taken out of prison, put in a hospital to prepare for his, what they call it, transfer. At the beginning, the State Department said, "Oh, we're going to release him." And then the media went crazy. You cannot release the guy, has American blood on his hand. Oh, well, we will transfer him. And then, this is ridiculous.
Shouldn't he have just been executed?
Aside that it would be regarded cruel and unusual punishment executing a blind man, for a truth seeker or independent journalist, if Alex Jones ever had credibility from the start to be labeled as one who has nearly spent 2 decades blaming the 1993 bombing on the FBI, self-proclaiming it to be the concern which initiated his platform, it would be extremely clumsy if not crass to suggest capital punishment on the central suspect of the unresolved conspiracy, only to then obstruct oneself from puzzling the rest of the unsolved crime. And as of Salem's appearance on the Alex Jones Show, the blind sheik ended up passing away 2 years later in February of 2017 due to health complications while in custody at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. His body was transported to Egypt for his funeral. But it's important to underline here still how the blind sheik's imprisonment and the attempts to free him or transfer has been used for geopolitical bargaining chips, even within fundamental terrorist attacks that have been carried out. But for Salem, he also uses the blind sheik's incarceration for his own agenda and cover.
I will bet you something here. We have 2 or a year and 3/4 left for Mr. Barak. He will release the sheikh before he leave office to shut the Muslim Brotherhood forever. And you can quote me on that.
And the sheikh was convicted. He went to jail for many years. He just died this year. How does that make you feel? And is the world, do you think that we're going to enter a more peaceful time, or are there other people like the sheikh who have already taken this place?
On the contrary, I think we are in more dangerous before the blind sheikh passed away, because a week before he passed away, he wrote his last will and testament, and he ordered his followers to revenge for him, quote unquote, violent revenge. The blind sheikh had followers on the American streets today. They are waiting for the opportunity to have a violent revenge for his death.
I guess whatever options that may have been put forth in either freeing or moving the blind sheikh didn't matter, and bringing any clarity to either potential circumstances wasn't in Salem's interest, but he certainly sounds like a decisive fearmonger.
This is a crucial point. It was not a black flag operation. It's not a false operation. It's a real crazy idiots, fanatics who wanted to commit jihad under the leadership of
Sure,
the
sir. I
blind
want to be
sheikh.
clear and not split hairs here, Colonel.
Of course, Alex Jones is not interested in bringing any clarity as to what really happened, classifying sensitive details as just merely splitting hairs, when also he resists challenging Salem, since obviously the subject of 1993 is admittedly his shock jock radio personality foundation, and as a result has shaped much of his worldview as well as for his captivated audience. And even though he isn't entirely a reliable source at this point, instead of challenging Imad, Jones just follows up with his deficient and loose explanation of a false flag, which is actually to the contrary as to who pulled off the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. As yet, Salem is clearly indicating that it's not a false flag, which he's right.
So I wouldn't throw the blame on the FBI, period. The listeners and you would like to understand, because I was there. I walk the walk and I talk the talk, and I am not afraid of nobody. If I am afraid, I wouldn't go undercover with assassins and evil doers.
So nearly a year later, on the cusp of Jones's historical interview with Donald Trump, Imad has his second interview with Jones on November 19, 2015, where now Jones has slightly changed or phrased his overall narrative of what the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was.
Bombing. He was there. He tried to stop it and was ordered to stand down. That's even been in the New York Times.
Well, Alex, unfortunately, if we allow this group of Sunni Wahhabist people to enter into our land, there is no doubt in my mind that it will happen again. We already got attacked in 1993 by the same group. However, different name, it's all the same ideology. But again, I don't know if our government wanted that to happen again, to start to take our liberty out of our hand more and more and put more restriction on the media. And then they will say, oops, it happened again. And they let these people to start to hurt the American people, to give them a reason to start to monitor more and to take our liberty out of our hands. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am afraid that if they allow these people to walk in, that's going to be a false flag operation to let them bomb America. And then they say, oops, they bomb America. We have to monitor America more and take your guns and take your liberty and take even the mainstream media today start to be controlled by the government.
Yeah, sure. As if allowing these people to come in and bomb America didn't happen in 1993 and 2001 already. But now it's more likely to happen. Right. Of course, Salem doesn't want to spoil it for Jones's lucrative fear-mongering, and he certainly didn't want to give it away by resonating with Jones's anti-Obama position.
Well, this is one of the policies Mr. Obama trying to do. He is trying to control everybody in America, taking your rights, taking your guns, stripping you from your rights so he can control you. You cannot defend yourself. You cannot stand up for your rights.
Mr. Barack Obama's upbringing with a father who believed in fanaticism to the point that he named his first son Malik on God's name and the second son Barak, which is the right of Prophet Muhammad. Mr. Barak's heart is a Muslim. I have no problem with that because I am a Muslim myself. But don't go to the fanatics, take them off a terrorist list, start supporting them, and then I have to pay the price as an American citizen. We are paying the price for increasing the power of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Although we don't want to drift off turning this into a subject about Barack Obama, but rather about Salem himself after 2011, coming out of hiding with his appearances on Alex Jones in 2015 and after. But separate from the unexpected turnaround with Jones that was incrementally taking place shifting away from 9/11 truth years before, there's something to be said as far as ideological position, in how Salem perceives our elected officials, government and media, especially in regards to foreign policy, since only for the U.S., it's drastically changed as a consequence to 9/11 that could have only succeeded without the failure of 1993 happening first. Salem referring to Obama as a Muslim on the Alex Jones show isn't the only unusual remark he makes about the president or the establishment, in which he's flat wrong on with his blanket assertion. He really takes it up a notch, insisting that his Kenyan half-brother, Obongo Obama is an extremist, that he's a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood in Africa, when in actuality, Obongo endorsed Trump, not the Democratic nominee as one would expect. Aside for Salem defending himself and supporting the official narrative of 9/11, it seems he still has other agendas, just being obsessed with Obama, when he decides to rehash Obama attending services of Minister Reverend Wright, making accusations that the Muslim Brotherhood are blackmailing Obama, and that Egyptians are portraying him as a radical.
If you see the intelligence on the Egyptian streets today, you can see how they portray Mr. Obama, how they portrayed him with the big beard and a turban. I want to go back to Mr. Obama's first speech in Egypt, in Cairo, Egypt. The first visit when he went there, and he said to the Muslim Brotherhood, I am sorry for what America had done. I don't understand what is Mr. Obama apologizing for. America was a great deal of help to Egypt at that time. We were giving the Egyptian military $1.5 billion by the B dollars as an asset, as an help with their military. Obama has apologizing about what America is doing, bringing democracy and trying to bring peace into the Middle East. Mr. President, you castrated the American military and the American influence around the world, and we are not helping even our allies in the countries in the Middle East. On the contrary, he is trying to say that he is fighting the war, but we are making only 5 bombings a day.
Nothing.
Oh yeah. Now that would certainly be a good idea to help him bring peace and prosperity after the lies and cover-ups of 9/11. But separate from Jones's twisted logic, Salem certainly sounds like a neoconservative too.
And if Mr. Obama really loves the Syrian people, what did he do when the Syrian people got gassed by Mr. Bashar al-Assad? What did he do about his red line to Mr. Assad if he gassed his people? This is not America, which I put my life and my family's life on the line for. Mr. Obama, please, please help America. Don't weaken America. America can lead the world. America cannot be led by Russia. Russia today have influence in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria.
Sure, and let's just arm another mujahideen all over again, since Russia is all over back in Afghanistan too. It seems to be working for us. Definitely a neocon.
Unfortunately, that's the price the American people, you and I, will pay. That we get alienated from the Middle East, and when we go ask them to help us to fight ISIS, of course they say, if you coming to support a terrorist organization called the Muslim Brotherhood, you coming now, one of the tails of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is ISIS, you want us to help you fight it? Sorry. And they walk away. And they went far from the United States to get their weapons from Russia and from China. And then, lo and behold, Russia will start to spread their wings on the Middle East, and we lose our leadership role around the world. America, I immigrated too, is the United States of America, and it is the supreme power on the planet, and we should maintain that. Increase the military power and increase our leadership around the planet.
Supreme power on the planet? Sounds like a flat-out warmonger to me.
I was happy to infiltrate people who are followers of the blind sheikh, because the blind sheikhs commit the biggest catastrophe to my life, assassinating my president on my watch. I was 300 to 400 feet from the stage where he was assassinated, because I was among the troops securing the parade. I was so very angry and I promised him revenge.
And that's because President Sadat made the first attempts to make peace with the arch enemy Israel. Is that correct?
Well, it was not an attempt. I mean, he was fought tooth and nail by the Arab leaders not to make this deal, but he stood his ground and he believed that Israeli people have the rights to live, Egyptian people have rights to live, there is no war anymore, and we're going to make peace, period.
Well, I guess that just confirms Salem as a Zionist.
It came a day when I saw the blind sheikh having 63,000 US dollars in a piece of newspaper wrapped, give it to Muntasir Zayat, his Egyptian attorney, and he said, give this lil-Hagga, al-Hagga, which is his wife. Next morning, I contacted my Egyptian intelligence friends in Egypt. I said, Muntasir Zayat coming back to Cairo, he have a newspaper wrapped under his clothes from the blind sheikh. I think it has some instruction to his followers.
At this point, it might be worth considering what Salem has admittedly disclosed here about having intelligence contacts back in Egypt, that he certainly must have also had contacts before he got involved with the cell the first time, which is one of the reasons why heads of the FBI didn't trust him, because they didn't know who he was ultimately serving. One of the greater reasons why to suggest Salem could have at least still had oversight or a bird's eye view of the cell members conspiring and making the bomb for the World Trade Center, as it was also reported in New York Times on April 5, 1993, that Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak said that the bombing could have been prevented if U.S. officials had heeded Egypt's warning about an Islamic fundamentalist network in the United States.
And in my conversation with them, they always say, let us to make them live in terror. And nothing beat terror but terror. So we have to do military, and there is no mercy here.
Looking back on everything from 93 to 9/11, being himself in the middle of its origin, Imad Salem is deeply invested in protecting the official versions, which is tremendously counter to Alex Jones's platform, who had long promoted the 1993 World Trade Center bombing as a domestic operation, claiming it as one of his founding wake-up calls, an inside job, as he still does for 9/11. But few have seen this Salem interview. Right before his second appearance on Jones's show, he did an interview with New York 9/11 truth activist Sander Hicks, where not only did Imad spend a great majority of the interview laying out the official narratives pre- and post-1993, even suggesting Muhammad Atta was taking orders from Osama bin Laden, but unlike other interviews, Sander, with limited time and wanting to shift the conversation into areas of 9/11 that conflict with the official story, boldly went straight to this question.
So I have a couple of other questions I wanted to run by you. It seems like you know a lot about 9/11, and it's great to talk to as somebody who's been inside the FBI. What do you know? Have you looked into Mossad, the Israeli connection? There was an arrest of several celebrating Israeli...
The van who is full of explosive.
Right, the moving van guys. There were guys from Israel who were videotaping the attacks, and they were holding up cigarette lighters like it's a rock concert, and they were high-fiving each other. And they were arrested by New Jersey state troopers, and then were released, and they got back to Israel, and they were on Israeli television. This is what really...
There are two different groups. The people who were high-fiving each other, watching the planes hitting, videotaping them, these people were not they were not arrested, and they went back to Israel, and they submitted interviews to the Israeli TV, and they acknowledged that they were taping the interview, the bombing of the 1991 World Trade Center.
2001.
2001.
Right.
Israel is so powerful in the United States. Nobody will deny that. And is Israel spying on the United States? Absolutely. I have an intimate knowledge of that.
Yeah, I think William Kunstler was onto something with his own investigations in regards to being tipped about Imad Salem receiving monies from Kahana Chai. Particularly when on his defense team, he had attorneys like Ron Kubi, who at the age of 13, after his parents divorced, joined the JDL under the influence of his father, who was a follower of Kahane, and immigrated to Israel as a teenager, but returned to the U.S. after being disillusioned by Zionism and Jewish extremism with its racism towards Arabs. But with the completely opposite end, with Salem being the Zionist, even with his position of deniability in the conspiracy to build the bomb for the World Trade Center on February 26, 1993, with consideration that federal authorities are not entirely being forthcoming either. Salem was never considered trustworthy by the Bureau since the beginning, and just by examining a fuller-length recording of the public Salem and Antisev tape, rather than just a sensationalized soundbite taken out of context, which generically, in the minds of some truth-seekers, has been misconstrued as Imad Salem being a whistleblower, Salem was obviously an extortionist in regards to getting paid for his services. His excuses for quitting the first time likely had to do with the same exorbitant amount he asked for and got the second time around, rather than it just being over family death threats. Being that Salem's polygraph tests were inconclusive, he could have been nefarious still, and had also been accepting other bids by organized interests, or had actual oversight or a bird's-eye view on the operation making the first bomb, making certain or even alerting Egyptian intelligence at the bare minimum that the bomb was going to go forward. But in Imad Salem's defense, and unlike Alex Jones, there are some credible researchers who believe Salem was honest, like former ABC News correspondent Peter Lance, who has written a great deal about 9/11 and especially 1993 and Salem's role as an FBI informant, while at the same time, Lance has been critical in regards to heads of FBI mishandling the investigations and other connected criminal activity concerning all the other suspects through cells and mosques. And there will be more to discuss about Peter Lance just ahead. But separate from the looming questions around Salem's bomb-making abilities or what was really being planned before he quit, the real question that should be asked is how were authorities able to quickly identify the proposed fill-in bomber, Ramzi Youssef, after Mohammed Salame's arrest and subsequent discovery of 3 addresses he was linked to. So far what we've seemed to uncover is a larger conspiracy in 1993 with other suspects involved not caught or followed up on. But you may have noticed within some images of suspects, and on an earlier report, that there is at least one conspirator who wasn't captured, and that is the 6th suspect, Abdul Rahman Yasin. All early books, documentaries, and feature films depicting the 1993 World Trade Center bombing before 9/11 shows no involvement with Yasin, when in fact, he was actually arrested the same day as Mohammed Salame, but unlike all the other 93 conspirators, he was the most helpful to the FBI, which in the long run, ended up protecting him and giving him a free pass. Yasin was born in Bloomington, Indiana by Iraqi parents, where his father was getting a PhD and then shortly moved to Iraq where he was raised there, until he moved back into the US in 1992, likely as a result from the first Gulf War the previous year. To get an idea of his story and what else was missing from the 1993 bombing, here is about 10 minutes worth from a rare CBS 60 Minutes episode with Leslie Stahl, who actually went to Iraq 10 months after 9/11 and interviewed Yasin.
Over the years, the U.S. government was able to track down all the other co-conspirators in the 93 bombing and bring them to trial. Yasin is the only one who's yet to be brought to justice in the U.S. We met him 10 days ago in this secret Mukhabarat facility for his first interview ever with Iraqi intelligence listening in. He seemed shell-shocked, if not terrified, a shadow of the armed and dangerous fugitive sought by the FBI.
Did you know you were on a most wanted poster in the United States?
Yeah.
Have you seen this?
You
know this.
He told us he went to the United States in 1992 to join his mother and brother in their apartment in Jersey City, New Jersey. It was easy to get a passport because he was an American citizen. So how did he become a terrorist? If you believe him, it was by sheer coincidence. He says he bumped into 2 fellow Arabs living directly above him in the apartment building, Ramzi Youssef and Mohammed Salame.
We used to drink tea together. My mother used to cook for the young men lunch and dinner, Arabic food.
Pretty soon, though, Youssef was recruiting him, roping him in through political indoctrination. As he describes it, he became the pawn of Ramzi Youssef.
He was not charismatic, but he had a strong logic. He can convince people easily. He convinced me.
So you're saying that Ramzi Youssef and Mohammed Salame, they tried to politicize you. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, they tried and I was influenced. They used to tell me that you are an Iraqi and you have seen the destruction in Iraq. And they used to tell me how Arabs suffered a great deal and that we have to send a message that this is not right. This is to revenge for my Palestinian brothers and my brothers in Saudi Arabia. So they talked to me a lot about this.
How did the operation get financed?
I don't know.
At first, he says, the plan was not to blow up the World Trade Center. Ramzi Youssef had something else in mind.
He told me I want to blow up Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn.
U.S. officials say they never knew that Brooklyn neighborhoods, like Crown Heights and Williamsburg, were on Youssef's original hit list. Somewhere along the way, the plan changed.
After a while, Ramzi Youssef told us to go to the World Trade Center. So we went there, walked around the parking garage. And he said afterwards, I have an idea. We should do one big explosion rather than do small ones in Jewish neighborhoods.
Now you switch to the World Trade Center. What did that have to do with Jews?
The majority of the people who work in the World Trade Center are Jews.
So in other words, the purpose was still to kill Jews.
In general, yes.
You know that Muslims work there, that people of all religions work there, all nationalities.
I am very sorry for what happened. I don't know what to do to make it up. My father died because of pain and sadness. It caused many troubles. I don't know how to apologize for it.
Not only does he express remorse, something none of the others in the plot has ever done, Yasin incriminates himself in more ways than the government ever knew. For instance,
you yourself went along to check out the Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn. You yourself went along to check out the World Trade Center with Ramzi Youssef.
We went, the three of us. Me, Ramzi Youssef, and Salem.
So you were involved to the extent that you were actually helping them check out the sites.
Yes, I used to like to go out and see places.
You knew that he was picking out things to bomb.
Yes, he told me that.
He also admits to helping Youssef buy the chemicals and equipment to make the bomb from this company in Jersey City.
You knew who you were dealing with here. You knew that he had been trained to come to the United States as a terrorist to make bombs and blow things up. You knew that.
I knew that after I started working with them.
Work, he says, that included helping make the bomb, which was assembled in a separate apartment in Jersey City they had rented.
You were mixing the chemicals.
I never worked with chemicals before. That was not my field.
But you were doing it.
He was teaching us. He was the teacher. Me and Salame were the students under his hand. At one time during the work, acid spilled on my leg. I have scars on my leg.
Did you help them load the bomb onto the van?
No.
Did you watch them do it?
Yeah.
You watched them do it? You didn't help because of your leg?
Yeah.
Was there a plan for what would happen after the explosion? Was there a getaway plan? Was there a rehearsal of what you would say if the police came?
No. There was no specific plan. Ramzi Youssef did the operation and ran off. He left the others to their fate. He did not care. He just left.
So you were on your own. You were all on your own.
A couple of days later, the FBI came calling. He says they broke into his apartment, tied him up, and conducted a thorough search. What they found, according to court filings, were traces of the bomb explosives on a scale, a toolbox, and a shirt. From the trash outside, they found the jeans he was wearing when he spilled acid on his leg, and torn pieces of a map showing the route to Youssef's other apartment. Before any of this could be analyzed, the FBI agents took Yasin to headquarters. Yasin was so helpful, the FBI released him.
The FBI let you go?
Yeah.
They let you go.
He drove me back home in the FBI car.
Did they ever ask you if you were involved in any way?
No.
They never once asked any question about whether you took part in this in any way?
No. All the talking was on Ramzi Youssef and Mohammed Salame.
Yasin reinforced the impression he was cooperating by voluntarily returning the next day and showing the FBI this apartment in Jersey City where the bomb was made. But the FBI agent didn't have a search warrant.
He told me he could not go in because he didn't have a warrant. Your work with us is finished. And so he drove me back.
He drove you back home.
He drove me back.
So they released him again. This time he went straight to a travel agent, bought a one-way ticket to the Middle East, and flew off that very night, never to be seen in the U.S. till now. Iraqi officials say they allowed our interview because they have nothing to hide.
Did anybody from Iraq send you to the United States?
No.
From the government?
No.
Were you in touch with anybody from the government?
No.
No. When I went to the United States, I had no idea about the explosion. I went there to live an ordinary life like any other American citizen. That's it.
Why did you let him go? You have a guy in your hands with an acid burn on his leg who lives in the same apartment building as some of the others you know are involved. He knows names, he knows locations. Explain why the FBI let him go.
It was a collective decision made by the FBI, by the United States Attorney's Office, whether or not that person, there was enough information to hold him. And
well,
at
he
that
had
time,
the acid burn. Wasn't that enough? Why wasn't that enough?
well, it was one factor, it was one piece of evidence. It
well,
wasn't
he knew all the others.
Not all the others. He knew several of the others. He knew of them. There was not enough information to hold him and detain him. And the decision was made and he was allowed to leave.
I would imagine that so far with these 2002 revelations from Yasin and FBI's Neil Hermit brings some clarity as to how and why the 1993 World Trade Center bombing investigations unraveled so quickly in discovery of Ramzi Yousef's residence and determining he was the mastermind. However, if you happen to notice on the CBS 60-minute piece, it clearly identifies that the apartment building Yasin was living at, also referred to as a previous residence for Mohammed Salem living above, along with Ramzi Yousef after arriving in the U.S., is none other than the 34 Kingston Avenue apartment in New Jersey, where Salem also used on the stolen vehicle report for the Ryder van in connection to the rental agreement, meaning that this was ultimately the residence of Mossad operative Josie Hadass. If the FBI's fumbling with handling Yasin wasn't enough to divert the public from looking into the apartment building as a hot address, then having a Mossad operative as a neighbor certainly would. Yasin was living with his family downstairs in apartment number 4, while Josie Hadass apparently lived upstairs in apartment number 8.
Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz. He says that Iraq has been trying to turn Yasin over to the United States. But he claims the government in Washington doesn't want the $25 million fugitive.
Twice we asked them to come and take him. They refused, which means that they are not sincere in what they are saying. They are not honest in what they are saying, you see.
The initial offer to turn Yasin over, he says, occurred during the Clinton administration in 1994, a year after that first attack on the World Trade Center.
We informed the American government that we have important information about that event. If you are interested, send a team to Baghdad to get that information.
They actually sent an emissary to the State Department to make the offer.
They did not reply. They did not reply at all, and they did not...
But your information was very vague, wasn't it?
Yeah, but we showed our goodwill.
But would you really expect them to respond to that?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that we feared that sending Yasin back to Iraq after arresting him and interrogating him was a sting operation.
You thought that the Americans were trying to sting you by sending him back?
Yes.
But for what purpose?
To tell people later on that, look, this man who participated in that event now is in Iraq, etc., and use it as they are doing now, using many false pretexts, you see, to hurt Iraq in their own way.
To suggest that Iraq was involved in the bombing?
Yes, yes.
So you were very suspicious that he was some kind of plant or...
We have the right to be suspicious of the American intentions.
He says their suspicions were borne out after September 11th, when Yasin was put on the most wanted list.
Yasin's ethnicity, being of Iraqi descent, has been exploited by neocon propagandists like Judith Miller cohort Lori Milroy to claim in her 2000 book, Study of Revenge, that there was an Iraqi-Saddam connection in 1993 and also to Osama bin Laden, just before 9/11 incidentally, based off the proximity of Ramzi Yousef's alleged birthplace and the fact that he first entered the U.S. with a fake Iraqi passport. Milroy has been so at this that her first book, also co-written by Judith Miller, Saddam Hussein and the Crisis in the Gulf, was the first prominent publication that instigated Desert Storm, which was released in October of 1990. But continuing just a little bit more with the 60 Minutes piece,
Aziz says Iraq made the offer as a way of proving that it wasn't involved in the 93 bombing and, by extension, 9/11. They're trying to prevent a U.S. attack and preserve the gains the country has made over the last 5 years. All the while in Washington, the debate over getting rid of Saddam Hussein is heating up. We asked the Bush administration to comment on the Iraqi offer to turn Yasin over. The White House told us to call the State Department, which told us to call the White House. Neither building would comment. So we turned to Kenneth Pollock, who handled Iraq issues at both the CIA and the National Security Council during the Clinton administration. He's now with the Council on Foreign Relations.
Do you think that Iraq was involved in the 93 bombing?
I've seen the CIA and FBI reports, and there is nothing in them to suggest that the Iraqis were themselves involved in the 93 World Trade Center attack.
One of the things that the Saddam Hussein government has been trying to do for a long time is open a back channel to the United States, to open some kind of a dialogue. Would there be anything wrong with doing that if it started over Yasin?
I think that opening any kind of a secret back channel with the Iraqi government would be a terrible mistake. They would let the whole world know that the United States had been meeting with the Iraqis in secret, and that would feed all of these fears throughout the Middle East that the United States was always looking to cut a deal with Saddam Hussein, that we really wanted to leave him in power and wanted to get out of the Gulf, and that would leave all of our allies in the region high and dry.
We know, for example, in connection with the original World Trade Center bombing in '93, that one of the bombers was Iraqi, returned to Iraq after the attack of '93, and we've learned subsequent to that, since we got into Baghdad and got into the intelligence files, that this individual probably also received financing from the Iraqi government as well as safe haven. Now, is there a connection between the Iraqi government and the original World Trade Center bombing in '93? We know, as I say, that one of the perpetrators of that act did in fact receive support from the Iraqi government after the fact.
Whether Osama bin Laden was actually killed in 2011 or had already died long before, the fact of the matter is that the FBI was never able to prove he had anything to do with the attacks of September 11th, and was only wanted for the East Africa embassies and USS Cole bombings. So just from the start, we already have problems putting Osama bin Laden's face behind 9/11 and or KSM as a mastermind due to the coerced confessions which led Mohammed to plead to his participation in well over 50 international crimes. In either case, it would seem that whomever had been arranging these attacks structurally as an Arab or fundamentalist organization seemed to have mutual interest with Israel by carrying out terrorist attacks that are all too convenient to set up a pretext to strike Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein from power. And with a balance of what we actually do know as well as the unanswered questions regarding 9/11, most of the Truth Movement comprehend it's easy to see areas of Israeli intelligence which lie behind false pretexts that misled to the disastrous war on terror in Iraq, where it's also easy to implicate the Mossad in some great part behind the attacks, or at least at the bare minimum, oiling the wheels of the Al-Qaeda Trojan horse. But when going back to 1993 and looking at the apartment building with a trail and a convenient portion of conspirators already set, with Yasin and Iraqi, Mossad spy Josie Hadass as a neighbor above, having already temporarily roomed with Mohammed Salem, who's used it as an address, along with Ramzi Yousef also briefly staying there, this is all just predictable revelation, and you can see why just with Yasin alone, who was hidden from the official narrative for a great period of time, that federal investigators would have been persistent in diminishing any of the press's questions over the addressed and not just on the inquiry over Josie Hadass and her role. And with this revelation also comes with a broader understanding, not just because of the unanswered questions regarding Yousef and his family background, but that he told others that he was Iraqi and first entered the country on a fake Iraqi passport. All of it rather quite telling. But when you come to also realize that if Mossad asset Ahmed Ajaj had also been successful entering the country at JFK Airport, he would have likely been staying at this same apartment. With these revelations hardly known to the general public, you have to ask yourself, are we really to believe the FBI just hired Ahmad Salem to infiltrate the cell originally in 1991, just over the shooting of a racist nationalist rabbi and some unknown Egyptian imam who only appears in July of 1990? Or were the feds already keeping an eye on the cell? Obviously the feds were already surveying them before all of this, going as far back as 1989 with photos taken of El Said Nosair and company at Galveston shooting range. But for what in 1989 exactly, as no Islamic or Arab terrorist attacks had occurred on U.S. soil? Remember the ABC Nightline Investigate World Trade Center Ground Zero with Ted Koppel from April 1st, 1993?
But by looking into their own existing files, the FBI has already discovered that it has dealt with some of these suspects before, more than 2 years ago.
As you have looked now and gone through the records of some of the men that have been arrested over the past few weeks, you have discovered that you'd met some of these guys before, right?
Some of the individuals have come to our attention in the past, yes they have.
Not all, but several of the suspects now being held in the World Trade Center bombing had been identified as potential terrorists more than 2 years ago. Indeed, they were brought in by the FBI for questioning.
During the Gulf War, we took very seriously the threat to the United States from terrorist elements. In fact, we tripled our commitment, agent commitment to terrorist matters during the Gulf War and thereafter. Some of the individuals involved in this case came to our attention, as you can imagine.
And it was in that context that you saw some of these men before.
That's right.
Among the charges that had been leveled but never substantiated against several of the men who are now charged in the World Trade Center bombing is that they had been overheard threatening to blow up a number of New York monuments. But back then, 2 years ago, the FBI was unable to muster enough hard information to warrant a full-scale investigation.
As useful as that would sound for the neocons in 2001, this revelation in the initial process of the 93 bombing investigation and just before the landmark plot sting occurred certainly goes against the official narrative, mainly being that if Nosair and associates were under FBI surveillance this early and with Nosair already imprisoned in 1991, after the Kahani assassination, during the peak of the first Gulf War in Iraq under George H.W. Bush Sr., this is particularly troublesome for the time period, even if under surveillance a year before, as we already know instantly from John Antisev's reactions. If we are supposed to process this early tip from Ted Koppel, which suggests that if these suspects were already able and planning to commit acts of terror, then that it would be in retaliation for Saddam Hussein and Iraq over the U.S.'s short-lived bombing campaign with Desert Storm. Why would all of this be contrary? Well, if you also stick to the official story, or the biographical profile of Osama bin Laden, following the Soviet Union's withdrawal from Afghanistan in February 1989, bin Laden's return to Saudi Arabia hailed him as a hero of Islamic Jihad. But once he returned, he engaged in opposition movements against the Saudi monarchy, while simultaneously working for his family business, the Saudi bin Laden Group. And then the following year, during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait under Saddam Hussein in August of 1990, put the Saudi kingdom and its royal family at risk with Iraqi forces on the Saudi border, where bin Laden, in return, met with Saudi Defense Minister Prince Turki bin Faisal, offering his mujahideen to deal with fighting off the looming Iraqi forces, instead of depending on assistance from the United States, who saw bin Laden as an affront to Islam by using Saudi Arabia, the holiest site in all of Islam, with Mecca and Medina being occupied by kuffar, non-believers who were allied with Israel. The kingdom flatly refused bin Laden's offer, and the Saudi monarchy went ahead with allowing deployment of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia. Shortly after, bin Laden publicly denounced Saudi dependence on the U.S. military, which led to the Saudi kingdom using the intelligence services, the General Intelligence Directorate, to suspend bin Laden's passport and hold him under house arrest. This led to a secret meeting between bin Laden and the head of the Saudi intelligence, Prince Turki bin Faisal, to meet, where he would offer bin Laden an alternative: leave the Saudi kingdom, and in return, his finances would be returned and his passport active. Bin Laden agreed, and in 1992, he relocated to the Sudan, where he was met in full accordance with Hassan al-Turabi, a popular Muslim cleric with the National Islamic Front. But according to staff writer for The New Yorker and author of the 2000 book, The Looming Tower, Lawrence Wright, that from notes taken at a meeting on August 20th, 1988, Al-Qaeda was a formal group with Abdullah Azzam, which by that time, bin Laden had already split from the Maktab al-Khidma, or the Afghan Services Bureau, wanting a more military role. This in turn becoming a basic revelation of an organized Islamic faction, and its goal is to lift the word of God, Allah, and his religion victorious. However, 3 months earlier on May 29th, 1988, Osama bin Laden's oldest brother, Salim bin Laden, had died in San Antonio, Texas, from a Sprint ultralight aircraft accident, crashing in high-voltage electric power lines. Salim bin Laden's death was a devastating blow to Osama, and essentially a point of newfound hatred for the United States, as he looked to Salim as being a dominant family figure, an influential one at best, who was the founder of the Saudi bin Laden Group, managing the family's extensive investment and income distribution. While yet their father, Mohammed bin Laden, ironically was also killed in a plane crash in 1967 at the hands of an American pilot. So according all of what transpired in 1988, and then the following year, with the Soviet Union's withdrawal from Afghanistan in February, and then also by November 24th, 1989, with Abdullah Azzam being assassinated by a car bomb in Peshawar, Pakistan. Even though back in the United States, the feds, for some given reason, are already watching El Sayed Nosair and Company. Al-Qaeda, as an organization, is not a developed terrorist network then, and contrary to what National Geographic and other official narratives defenders suggest that Azzam's death may have been a plot from the CIA, Israeli Mossad, or even from bin Laden and Egyptian cleric Ayman al-Zawahiri themselves, Azzam's murder still remains unsolved. By 1990, with Nosair assassinating Meir Kahane on November 5th, Operation Desert Shield, which was the buildup of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, was still in effect until January 1991, when the real conflict began under Operation Desert Storm, and not long after, Azzam loyalist Mustafa Shalabi is also found murdered in his New Jersey apartment on February 25th. And yes, evidence suggests Nosair's cousin, Ibrahim El-Gabroni, did travel to Afghanistan and elsewhere raising money for the defense fund for his cousin, where Osama bin Laden was also a contributor, and is also said that he suggested hiring William Kunstler. And afterward, when it came to Ramzi Youssef, bin Laden acknowledged who he was, but he never claimed to personally know him, but was aware of his bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. Even though there are certain overlaps with those that are deemed as Al-Qaeda operatives, it makes no sense why bin Laden would have networked or admired the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed faction family from Baluchistan with Youssef, with their vitriol for Shiite and Persians, where bin Laden himself had no qualms against Shiite Muslims, nor especially the nation of Iran, which he had even visited, as well as one of his sons who lived there for a long period of time. But aside from the historical record which puts bin Laden as not having been responsible for any terrorist attack until 1992, with the bombing of the Gold Mehor Hotel in Aden, killing only 2 people, for this time frame back in 1990, specifically regarding Nosair's assassinating Kahane, not only a question of how, but why. Why would bin Laden be interested in or networking with Nosair, who's already suspected of possible militant activity during the Gulf War, which would garner more U.S. military activity, and contrary to what bin Laden wishes, added that he's no fan or friend with Saddam or Iraq, when he's offering his mujahideen to fight them. It also becomes a question of how. How could bin Laden be involved or networked with Nosair in 1989, while bin Laden was still in the process of transitioning, with both Abdul Azzam being alive and the blind sheikh having not entered inside the U.S. yet? The reason why this really matters, or that it all comes down to Nosair, is that due to the subsequent search of his apartment after the Kahane assassination, in which they found enough evidence asserting that he was targeting the Twin Towers and other New York skyscrapers, but that he had a list of 12 other assassination targets of prominent Jews and New York officials. Peter Lance, who has written 3 extensive books on 9/11, one particularly addressing the case of Ali Mohammed, the triple agent for the CIA, FBI, and Egyptian Islamic Jihad, who first came into the U.S. as a translator for Ayman al-Zawahiri's first U.S. tour of Islamic mosques. Even though Lance has been a great researcher who was uncovered links that the authorities resisted connecting, he suggests that Ali Mohammed was ultimately Nosair's handler. But even if he had served in Afghanistan, when you start to question this time frame and follow the trails of these suspects, as well as those do appear in 1993 after Imad Salem disappeared, it's more than likely that Nosair may have been taking orders elsewhere, particularly in regards to whatever position Osama bin Laden was or connected to at the time. Plus, admittedly, with the case of Ali Mohammed and his egotistical attitude, he made it quite clear that he didn't need Osama bin Laden or a fatwa to be active. But as the story goes with Ali, prior to being recruited from CIA offices in Cairo, he then later moved to North Carolina and enlisted in the United States Special Forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Not only did he train anti-Soviet Afghan mujahideen in the early 90s, but he also trained Al-Qaeda volunteers and allegedly Osama bin Laden and al-Zawahiri themselves. While in the US, he trained El Sayed Nosair and Mahmoud Abalima, which is why after the Mayor Kahani assassination, with also all the army training manuals found at Nosair's place, Ali already became a person of interest to US authorities even before 1993. Ali Mohammed was later charged for the 1998 East Africa embassy bombings before attempting to leave the US in 1998, as was Wadi al-Hajj, who was also linked through telephone records to Ali while living in Northern California, in addition to Ali's Mohammed native Arabic incidentally.
He's adventurous and well-educated, fluent in English, French, Arabic, and Hebrew.
As far as Ali Mohammed's incarceration, it's been kept secret from the public due to reports in October 2001, as a consequence of 9/11, that he may have been cooperating with the U.S. government, and according to former FBI agent Ali Soufan in 2012, he confirmed that Ali is still awaiting sentencing. Most of the 1993 bombing conspirators are being held at Supermax ADX prison in Florence, Colorado, which we'll address soon. Other conspirators are being held elsewhere. But interestingly, Ali Mohammed's fate was far different than another suspect he was connected to, while living in North Carolina, through Wadi al-Hajj's number in Nairobi, Kenya, was Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, a brother-in-law of Osama bin Laden. In December of 1994, Khalifa was arrested and detained for several months without bail in Mountain View, California, on charges related to the 1993 bombing, where all of a sudden, with no explanation, he was deported to Jordan to face a conviction for a sting of theater bombings, which in happenstance, his conviction was already overturned due to a witness recanting their testimony. Khalifa then left for the Philippines and returned to Saudi Arabia, where authorities claim he was found to have been funding the Bojinka plot by 5 phone numbers of him found at the Joseph apartment in Manila, where Yusuf's bomb factory and laptop was found after the apartment fire. Khalifa confirmed that he knew Pakistani Wali Khan Amin Shah and was a high school student of his when he was a teacher in Medina, Saudi Arabia. Shah was arrested by Manila police at another apartment on Singlong Street, which Yusuf had set up in case the Bojinka plan failed. But with Khalifa in the middle, this does show potential overlap or a degree of association between Yusuf KSM family and bin Laden. The day before Khalifa's 50th birthday, in 2007, he was killed in southern Madagascar while visiting his gemstone mine. Reports state that around 25 to 30 armed men raided Khalifa's residence in the middle of the night, attacked him with various weapons, and removed his computer and other intelligence materials. His family believed that he was assassinated by Joint Special Operations Command. But still, if they were able to prove, even if circumstantially, that Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law was involved in a Bojinka plan, where Yusuf and his uncle certainly were at, even if dead, then why haven't the FBI been able to prove that he was behind 9/11 and have only charged him still for the USS Cole East Africa embassy bombings and small terrorist attacks throughout Africa and the Middle East, and not 9/11? And not to mention, neither the 1993 World Trade Center bombing either. And with so many unanswered questions and cover-ups regarding the destruction of the World Trade Center, if you think the Bojinka plan doesn't ultimately matter in regards to 9/11, just because there's an official narrative of only 4 hijacked flights, it would be worth reconsidering that, as with what Ramzi Youssef said in his only interview to Al Hayat newspaper after his sentencing, about a new Islamic militant group that would rise and challenge the U.S., Ramzi Youssef certainly could not have been declaring vengeance be carried out under the limited number or official scope of only 19 hijackers and 4 airliners, especially if we know there's been planned coordinated bombing strikes on the U.S. several years before 1993 during the Gulf War. Was Youssef warning of someone else finishing out the total third phase of the Bojinka plot as 9/11, finishing something he didn't even start? Regardless of the targets, or if there was someone else behind Osama bin Laden or even Youssef and KSM, who was also said to have traveled to Israel right before the discovery of the Bojinka plot, how serious of a roster of hijacking teams or militants were here on U.S. soil in the fall of 2001, as even what Colonel Mendoza forewarned about actually might have been possible in the original 9/11 attacks? If you want an answer to this, watch my film, Bojinka Plot Confirmed, The Thwarted Hijackings of 9/11 and 9/13. But continuing with the unresolved matters in the 1993 bombing that are still a consequence to 9/11, some of the other profiles of the 1993 cell and linked conspirators do need to be underlined or considered more in exploring to try to help find answers. And the peculiar circumstances with the way some of these suspects were portrayed in the media, as well as their legal defenses and characters, need to be examined. Like Mohammed Salameh, after the attacks, investigators had also believed in the probability, due to his ancestral region, he may have been related to Ali Hassan Salameh, the so-called Red Prince of the Black September, intricately behind the 1972 Munich massacre. Salameh is currently an inmate at ADX Supermax. Plus the other Palestinian, Nidal Ayad. Why did he take credit for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing as the Liberation Army 5th Battalion? Nidal Ayad, an alleged Rutgers University graduate, is apparently serving his life sentence in federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. And then there's Mahmoud Abalina, the Red, again, one of the few who was able to flee. It's highly suggested that he was the getaway vehicle for Nasser during the Kahana assassination. In 1981, he first moved to West Germany from Egypt, later recounting that he lived a life of corruption, girls, drugs, you name it. After being denied political asylum, he quickly married a nurse in Munich so he could remain in the country, then divorced her 3 years later while eventually marrying another woman in a Muslim ceremony, and then eventually moving together to Brooklyn in 1986. And there's a lot of mystery behind Iyad Ishmael, being that he seems very westernized and was originally living in Texas right before he appeared in New York to take part in the conspiracy of the 1993 bombing, and had successfully fled, being the last conspirator captured in August of 1995. And aside for El Said Nosser and his cousin Ibrahim Al-Gabroni, there is certainly a good amount that needs to be addressed in extension when it comes to the landmark plot bombers or those close to the Blind Sheik's inner circle that we don't really have enough time to expand on, like the Sudanese Sadiq Ali, or also with the American-born and former member of the Moorish Sayyids Temple, Clement Rodney Hampton L., who already died in 2014, or to cover their circumstances or legal defenses, like the follow-up stories with Ahmed Abdel Sattar and attorney Lynn Stewart defending the Blind Sheik after William Kunstler passed. There's more to the story here, just as it was for 3 of the 93 bombing conspirators, Salameh, Abu Halina, Ayad, to have published statements or have been allowed to write up 90 letters from inside Supermax prison after 9/11, encouraging other fellow extremists around the world to terminate the infidels because Muslims don't have any option other than jihad, asking others to bring them happiness so that they could die as martyrs in prison. It was said they were exhorting and helping recruit would-be terrorists from inside an American prison. One of Salameh's letters, in which he calls Osama bin Laden the hero of my generation, is published in a newspaper in July of 2002. But this does not result in any security attempts to stop other letters coming out of ADX until 2005. But what did Salameh even mean by his generation?